and in this video I'm going to show you 5 different core exercises that are great to start doing early postpartum. These are considered core exercises because they are training the deep core in that you have to keep your spine still as your hip moves. And all of these muscles work with the pelvic floor and the deepest abdominal layer. So while that you may not be directly strengthening or focusing on your pelvic floor, the main focus is to keep your spine still without holding your breath, without straining. So you are innately training the deep core as you do this. You'll see these exercises often in a rehab setting or a bar setting, and potentially any other core training programs that you've done in the past. But the difference here is now I've guided you through how to engage your deep core to keep your spine still in previous videos. So this is now taking that one step further. A couple principles that I want you to keep in mind as you do these exercises. Your main goal is to keep your back straight. Your back straight or in a neutral position indicates that you're using your trunk stabilizers and your hip is moving freely regardless what strategy you're using. Because some people need to have a little bit, I don't want to say Kegel every time, or I don't want to have to use the word draw your belly button inward towards your spine, because everyone needs something a little bit different. Principles, though, don't change. So what you're looking for, spine is neutral. Second, you're not holding your breath. Third, your belly button is relatively staying still. So it's not bulging outward. It makes sense based on your breathing pattern. So if you are breathing really deeply, that is going to match your belly button movement. The next principle is the movement of your hip. So your pelvis is here, and your pelvis is directly connected to your spine through the sacroiliac joint. So if your pelvis moves, meaning tip forward or tip backwards, then I know your back is moving. So what you're paying attention to is that your hip is moving and there's no movement in your back. There's three planes of movement that I'm going to show you. You have sagittal plane movement, so forward and back. That's going to be hip flexion and extension. Flexion is up here, so a marching position. Extension is your hip going behind your body. Movement in the frontal plane, so this plane here. Now, I'm going to tip the camera a little bit so you can see me. This is hip abduction. This is hip adduction. So, abduction, meaning moving away from midline. Adduction, coming towards midline, adding to midline. And then rotation. So imagine you had a spike through your head. It would be turning like this. Well, that spike goes through each joint. So if it's the hip, then this is the motion I'm talking about. Rotation. And notice I'm not moving in any other planes. So we're going to train the muscles in all those planes. And know that I'm just demonstrating one position or a couple positions. This applies to standing. It applies to standing on one leg. It applies to being on hands and knees. It applies to it's a foundational movement, and you can be creative once you get the basics down. First movement I'm going to show you is hip rotation. And I'm going to show you this as I'm laying on my back. So I'm going to tip the camera a little bit again. And as you set up, first thing is find a neutral spine. So that is how you get to your neutral spine. You might need to have a deep core brace just to get there, or you just shift your pelvis a little bit. And what I'm going to have you do is you're going to let your leg fall out to the side until the point you feel that everything starts to move, so the top of your pelvic bone. So I'm going to rotate my hip out to the side and then bring it back in. Now the key focus here is the abdominal abdominal wall, or the deep core, is trying to control my leg versus my hip doing the work. So this is a core exercise, not necessarily a hip strengthening exercise. So for me to keep my back still and not let everything move, I'm going to gently draw my belly button in towards my spine. I'm making sure it stays there and not pooches outward, and then I'm coming back. And there's minimal movement here, so I know I did that right. And then the next rep, I'm going to pay attention to how I'm feeling this. I feel it in my abs, great. If you don't get it right away, it takes time, so don't get frustrated. The second position that I'm going to show you, hip rotation, is on your side. So first thing, find a neutral posture. So right now I'm a little rounded. Right now I'm too arched. So this is neutral for me. Now, I'm going to make sure that my belly button stays still and my back doesn't rotate as I open up my hip like this. And then I'm going to control down. So I know what I want out of this, and I know that it's keeping my belly button inward. So I'm feeling it a little bit in my abdominal wall, my deep core, but then I'm also feeling it right here on my hip because this is a pretty challenging motion for the deep hip rotators. So the next hip rotational movement is going to be internal rotation. So I'm moving my hip inward, but my foot moves upward. The hip is driving the motion, not my foot. So keep that in mind. And then here, I feel this more so in my groin, but the most important thing that I want you first to focus on is that you're not rocking forward and back. So as you're setting up, you almost want to feel like you're leaning forward, and then everything is stacked. Second movement I'm going to demonstrate is going to be hip flexion. So the principles here are to work the really small stabilizers. They set you up to work with small stabilizers. We're not trying to train the big muscles. They're meant to be very slow, and they're meant to be intentionally not challenging so that we're not encouraging the big muscles to work. So try not to say, well, this is so easy, because it's easy to say that. Okay, so now I'm going to find my neutral spine, belly button stays in, I'm sliding my hip down, and then I'm sliding my hip back inward to the starting position. The other option here is my belly button stays down, I'm lifting my hip to here, and then I'm coming back down. No movement in my back, no movement in my pelvis. I feel this in my abdominal wall. It took me time to get that, so you really just be patient and just try to keep your back straight and focus on, moving slowly and using your deep core to stabilize your back. Third movement is going to be hip adduction. So the top hip is going to be like this. I'm going to find my neutral spine here, and I'm going to lift my lower leg like this. Now nothing is moving. My belly button stays in. And I'm going up and then down. So that's adduction. Abduction now. I have a wall purposely behind me because it gives me guidance to make sure my hip doesn't come forward. I'm going to bring my heel against the wall, back's in neutral, and I'm sliding my hip upward until everything tilts. Now, it's not a bad thing if everything tilts once you get to your end range motion for this exercise, because that's what has to happen. But you don't have, for the purpose of the goal of this, I don't want you to move past the point your pelvis starts to tilt upward. Just your hip. You're going to feel this on the outer part of your hip and a little bit into your core, but this is going to be pretty apparent that you might not feel it in your belly as much. So belly button still stays inward though. Okay, next one, hip extension. So you might need a pillow underneath your belly, and it'll go horizontally across right here. What I'm going to have you do now is once you find a neutral position, you're going to lift your hip, and your focus is not to tilt your pelvis forward or backwards. Just stay still. So I'm going to draw my belly button inward, and then I'm going to lift my hip up. So for me, my strategy after I pull my belly button inward is to tighten my glutes and move really slowly so that I don't start to arch in my back like I just did there. I'm not moving that much. Remember, the goal is to train the deep core. Okay? Next one is laying on your back. Your knees are bent. And it's a shoulder exercise now. So I find my neutral position. I tuck my chin. You might need a pillow here. My thumbs are going to be pointed upward. I'm going to tilt my shoulder blades. So if my shoulder blades tend to be forward like this, I'm going to tip them backwards. I'm not pulling them down and in. I'm just lifting my chest a little bit. And then as I lift my chest to tip my shoulder blades back, my belly button comes inward. And I'm reaching overhead. And at the point where my rib cage starts to do this, I've gone too far. So resetting, this is the right way, belly button in, tip, coming up, right about here, and then I come back down, and I'm making sure that I stay tipped rather than letting my shoulders come forward. One more time, and then back down. So the idea here is that we're staying connected from ribs to pelvis, because that's where all the muscles attach, from the ribs into the pelvis. Okay, so we reviewed principles of these exercises as core exercises in the postpartum period. I say postpartum, but this can apply to a lot of things. I use these a lot as core exercises and not just hip exercises. Your goal is to keep your spine straight. Your spine stays straight with intentionally keeping it straight and not letting your pelvis move as your hip moves. The 5 exercises that I showed you work the hip or the arms in different planes. So the main plane, at least for the hips that I reviewed, main 3 planes, or all the planes that we have, are sagittal, or forward and back, side to side, which is the frontal plane, and then turning in the transverse planes. We got hip flexion extension. We've got hip abduction, adduction. We've got hip rotation, both external rotation and internal rotation. And then we have, the one arm exercise that I demonstrated, and that was bringing your arms overhead without that happening, or without doing that. So go ahead and give those a shot. And sets and reps, I say if we're trying to get things to build awareness, I like people to hold positions, but in that, the only one that I would suggest holding would be the hip external rotation exercise on your side. So no other holds, and you're going to do 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. If that's really hard, to start with 1 set. And if you can only do 5, you can only do 5, but it gives you somewhere to go. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, drop them below in the comment box.